Hello, and welcome to CivilNet. I'm your host, Paul Vartan-Sukiasyan, and today our guest is Carolin Geginat, Country Manager for the World Bank in Armenia. The World Bank has just announced its latest 5-year engagement strategy with Armenia aimed at reducing poverty and improving resilience. Thanks for joining us, Carolin.
Thanks for having me, Paul.
Well, this is a very big plan that's going on, 5-year term. What's in this partnership framework for Armenia?
So our partnership framework is an agreement in principle with government on what we're going to do in the next 5 years. And we have designed together a program around 3 pillars of engagement. 1, more and better jobs. 2nd, human capital resilience. And 3rd, resilience of the economy and Armenia at large. And under those 3 areas, we're going to do several things. I'm not going to go through all the lending operations we have planned, but they're all in support of those 3 pillars, and we're estimating to probably invest about $1.7 billion across the World Bank Group. That means not just our public sector arm, but also IFC, which lends to the private sector.
Well, one of those that I hear is jobs, and jobs is always important, no matter where, but especially here in Armenia. Well, what kind of jobs are they looking to make, and how are they going to do this?
Yes, I agree. Jobs are always important. In fact, they're so important that we at the organizational level at the World Bank are now really trying to raise the focus of this in our lending across the world. Because 9 out of 10 jobs in the world are created in the private sector. And jobs are the most important way for people to get out of poverty. And we see that also in Armenia. When we look at the poverty trajectory of the country over the last 30 years that we've been here, we've seen that the main route for people to get out of poverty is through jobs. Unemployment here is still very high. I mean, we're, I think, now looking at 13%, and it's been at that level and even above for the last 2 decades. And we see 2 reasons why this is happening. One, it has to do with the educational system of Armenia, which is under reform, but needs a lot of support to basically prepare people better for the jobs of the future and build foundational skills. And then there is a lack of labor demand. And what do we mean with this? We mean the private sector is not creating enough jobs. So our operations are focusing on some key sectors to help with that and to support Armenia in also reforming some of the regulatory reforms that have to happen to boost private sector growth.
So you mentioned there the importance of developing skills for the Armenian youth. How is this program going to be doing that?
So, I mean, we tackle that from various fronts, and it's not just us, it's many donors. I think, in terms of the big challenges that Armenia has, one is only 1/3 of kids are currently getting preschool education. And we know this is very important because it's foundational skills, and it's one of the low-cost investments you can make into the development of kids further down the line. So there, under one of our existing projects, we're building kindergartens, with trying to add to those investments that government is also making itself. Then there's the aspect of general education. How do you equip schools with labs, with STEM education to create more of these skills that are very much sought after in the labor market today? And there we've been providing support both in terms of lab equipment, so practical skills, rebuilding some of the high schools, and more importantly, supporting the STEM curriculum reform that government is currently undertaking. And then last, there's of course higher education. So if you want people to go into higher education, you have to make it as attractive as possible and as much geared towards the labor market. And so currently that's not happening in Armenia. Armenia has many, many, many degrees, but what we find is that private firms are telling us they're not finding the kind of skills that they're looking for. And one way to address this, and it's ongoing, is to really reform higher education, which is a reform that happens across the former Soviet Union. We see it in all the neighboring countries as well. To basically make it more quality oriented and not just you get a diploma, but no one really knows what the diploma is for. And then link it more to science so that people who are really serious about staying in academia have a pathway to take those skills forward from higher education to science and then maybe into research commercialization. Because what's currently happening in Armenia is you lose a lot of your best talent to universities abroad. And I think that is a problem, for Armenia's development. And therefore it needs to be addressed. And the only way to address this is to strengthen your own university system.
And there's a health component as well, I believe.
On human capital? Yes, of course. I mean, we all know that we're more productive individuals when we're healthy. Armenia has a very high incidence or disease burden around non-communicable diseases, which are basically hypertension, diabetes, heart disease. And these are all diseases that could be prevented if people got better preventive care and made better lifestyle choices. And that is currently not happening in Armenia because the way health is financed makes people go mostly to the doctor last minute because everything is being paid out of their own pocket. Very few people have access to insurance. And that means they do not prioritize preventive care. And this is an area where we're supporting the Ministry of Health now to basically help them with the design of the insurance system that's going to be rolled out and support the quality of the primary healthcare system so people actually trust it and go there because that's another aspect, of course, that needs to happen to strengthen the health of the Armenian nation.
1.7 billion across the World Bank Group, that's a really big number over 5 years, but Armenia does face numerous challenges. We've got infrastructure gaps, climate vulnerabilities, a lot of things to take into consideration. How are you going to prioritize these needs and allocate this money effectively?
No, it's a very good question. I agree. Armenia has a lot of needs. And I think one of the strengths and comparative advantages of the World Bank is that we are not just a bank, we also call ourselves a knowledge bank. And what does that mean? We invest heavily in research to help exactly with those questions of prioritization. So in the last 4 years, we've produced a lot of analytical work for the government of Armenia to help them prioritize. One of them is our country climate diagnostic report, which basically looks at how is Armenia going to fulfill its goals on growth, on its growth strategy, and to reduce poverty further while taking into account all the climate challenges they have. And I think the good news is that a lot of the investments that are currently planned by the Armenian government are already working in the right direction. I think what will be just important is that those investments are really done in the most climate smart way possible. So let me give you an example. We are about to negotiate a big engagement in the water sector. And here the government has asked us to help them really modernize the conveyance system in the irrigation sector. Armenia, like many countries in the post-Soviet space, is dealing with a dilapidated infrastructure for irrigation. In fact, they lose 75% of the water on the way to the farm gate. And so they need to upgrade anyway. And when we do now go into modernizing these schemes, there's a lot you can do to also increase the energy efficiency of it. So for example, currently in Armenia, you lose a lot of money because you're using pump systems. And that means, that's energy you're spending. That can be improved by using what we call gravity systems, where you're just working with gravity and you can save that energy component. Also by really fixing the pipes and maintaining them properly in the future, you will be able to reduce evaporation, which is very important from a climate adaptation perspective, because that's all water that's being lost and is not being used in the fields. So that's just an example. And we do all the analytics for that to help government then decide which system to focus on and how to save most energy, how to make it most climate resilient.
Well, something that I don't know how widely known it is, but there's a huge problem. You mentioned water for the whole world. I mean, water, the future wars are going to be fought over water.
Yes.
And we actually saw that a lot in Nagorno-Karabakh as well. That was actually a big fueling, that maybe a lesser known aspect of it. Yeah. And so here in Armenia, some of its biggest industries, like mining and the fish farms, which are not widely known, but right down there by Mount Ararat, we have tons of fish farms, which, I mean, they're going to be able to export them to Europe now. That's going to be great for them. But the amount of water that it uses is just terrible. So, how are we balancing these immediate economic needs with the long-term climate needs, and especially that water? Armenia needs to reserve its water.
I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges that Armenia has in that respect is that there is a perception out there that water is abundant in Armenia and that it's very cheap. And I think that mindset has to change. It is indeed a very important resource for many sectors, and it needs to be accurately priced. But at the moment, it's very difficult to price it higher because people are not getting really a lot of water. So I think the most important thing across the board that needs to happen is to just make sure that not so much water is lost. I mean, as I said, you lose about 75% of water to the farm gate. In the poorest country in Europe, it's like 40%, right? So Armenia really has a lot of savings potential there that then allows it also to use it in different industries. But I mean, it's also about raising industry standards so that industries or agriculture make the most efficient use of water. And there, I think, especially in agriculture, Armenia still has a lot of room to improve the way it uses water and to maximize this very rare resource that it has.
Totally agree with that. Now, something interesting that, again, our viewers might not know about is that the World Bank has the IDA, the International Development Association, which is an arm that helps the poorest countries in the world. Now, Armenia is now a donor to that since 2023, but it's also a recipient of the World Bank funds. So what does this mean for Armenia?
So I think for us it's wonderful news because it means that Armenia, which started out as an IDA recipient, when it became a member of the World Bank, it was purely getting subsidized loans from the IDA arm in 1992. And it has now, it graduated from IDA, meaning it was basically able to get lending on market basis in 2019, and now it's a donor. And what does that mean? It's giving back. And it's giving back, of course, proportionate to what it has. I mean, so it's not that Armenia is going to be the main financier of IDA, but I think what it means also is that Armenia has a seat at the table of IDA, and IDA countries, current IDA countries, are looking at Armenia because it's a success story. I think Armenians can be very self-critical, and they see all the things that are not happening. But if you think of it, that this country moved within 30 years, or less than 30 years, from low income to upper middle income, that's a success story. And that came with a lot of reforms that other countries are trying to learn from. And so by being a donor to IDA, it's not just giving some money. More importantly, it gives all its knowledge, and it's in these fora represented and can answer questions to other countries trying to emulate what Armenia achieved over the last 30 years.
You're really correct about the self-critical nature of things.
I've lived here for 4 years.
Yeah, well, there you go. You've got the experience, and even before, I mean, years ago, there was this saying that this country is not a country, and we really do have to step up and realize, no, like there are some good things happening. People love to either be completely negative or just overly positive, and really there's that realistic balance. And one of the aspects of being a country is the ability to attract foreign capital and income.
Yes.
And so, here we go. That's one of the aspects of this World Bank plan. Going across the whole group and its network. So what is it going to be doing? The government has had, it's tried to attract private, investors, and it has to some degree, but there's been issues. We had this ANIF, which was a complete failure, unfortunately, and there's the fallout from that. There's the dry port in Gyumri, which the government has been trying to get private investors, which very mixed results. So what is the World Bank going to do?
So, I mean, foreign direct investment is a tough call for a small country with two closed borders and high political risks, right? I mean, so we have to acknowledge this. Investors price this in. However, Armenia has many ways or many advantages that it can work to attract foreign direct investment. And I think it's making progress in this regard. So one is that it has a very pro-business government. And it's not just this government, it's been like this for the last decades, which is also one of the reasons why our private sector arm actually has been quite successful, because usually in small countries like Armenia, we struggle to find deals because they're too small to make it economical. But here in Armenia we were. And why? Because there is a general pro-private sector attitude. And that's great. I think the things that Armenia needs to do to be able to attract more foreign direct investment are several. And one is, of course, do as much as possible to improve the business environment. We'll be soon relaunching our business ranking. We used to have a Doing Business report. We now call it Be Ready. And Armenia will be included in the next one in the fall. And I'm really curious to see where it lands in the ranking. And I hope that will spur also a bit of friendly energy in government to focus on some of the key reforms. So the business environment, there's still room to make things easier. And I think part of that is what we hear a lot from investors is making it a bit more predictable, because there's a lot of changes in legislation, as the government is trying to refine its legal rules. There's a bit too much change going on, and we hear
sometimes
that as a complaint.
Arbitrary as well.
Well, I mean, I think it's it's maybe trying to do too many things at the same time, then realizing you need to kind of do a little bit more on a legislation. So sometimes it's better to wait and then come with the big legislation and have it stay. But I think that is slowly happening. Another area is, of course, making the trade environment as easy as possible. Because why do foreign direct investors come to small markets? Either because they want resources, which is the case in the mining sector in Armenia, or because they think they can produce something more efficiently here and then export it. Right? Because Armenia itself is a small market. So for a foreign direct investor, so you really need to find ways to cut your trade costs at everywhere, from air transport to getting through customs, to make it possible for an investor to come and say, okay, we're going to produce in Armenia, and it's going to be slightly cheaper, and then we're going to get it to other markets around Armenia. And there, of course, if a peace deal happens, an opening of the borders would be quite a game changer. So I'm saying all of this to say that there are some challenges that Armenia naturally faces that are hard to overcome, but I think there's room to basically boost the foreign direct investment. Then there's, of course, domestic investment, right? And I think there you can do a lot in terms of an improved business environment. And we see that happening. So, but there's, as I said, I think predictability will be very important, and we're super happy to see that IFC is able to identify a lot of areas where they think they can invest here. So, which Armenia should be. This is one of the things I think Armenia should be proud of. We usually really don't have big deals in many small countries. So Armenia there is punching above its weight.
Oh, that's really interesting. It's interesting to get that kind of vantage that we don't normally hear. And finally, a lot of this funding does come in the form of loans. And I know there's many people out there in a small country like Armenia who are wary of taking loans. This is a big global bank, and Armenia is a small country, and it is actually facing a bigger and bigger debt crisis over the past few years, especially subsidizing the loans from Nagorno-Karabakh. It's got some big issues in that. So how would you address these concerns?
So I think, first of all, I think it's great when the public looks at this question, because every government needs this check and balance of people, monitoring how the debt is going. I don't think Armenia has a debt crisis. There is no debt crisis in the sense that, it cannot serve its foreign debt. It's actually consistent with its fiscal rule, which, in itself is great that it has a fiscal rule that sets a certain debt target, and it tries to stay within this rule. So in that sense, we generally deem Armenia to be quite fiscally responsible. Now, having said that, as you said, there's a lot of financing needs, and of course its debt is rising. From the World Bank's perspective, we take that always into account. We cannot go to our board and get a new lending to Armenia cleared if we cannot prove to the board and our management that we're contributing to a debt problem, right? So the way we do this is we have to present economic analysis that shows that that loan will repay itself, by basically creating economic benefits that will then boost government's capacity to repay the debt. And so that is, that's how we operate. We are not just lending because government wants a bridge or something. We can only build that bridge if our internal analysis shows that bridge will really add value economically for Armenia to be able to sustain the debt.
Well, thank you, Carolin. This was a very interesting insights into really the kind of inside baseball we don't normally get to see, and gave us some more perspectives to look at Armenia with.
Well, thanks for letting me share some of our World Bank experience, and it's been a pleasure to be here.
And thank you for joining CivilNet.